if you think that Rogan's podcast is just a bad thing for the world, I would encourage you to go to listen to some of the episodes that are not political at all, especially go find the Jewel episode.
One day, so my panic attacks were still really a big problem. And I started to get to where I could feel a panic attack coming on. And I was like, wait a minute, your body can't be in two states at one time. Like, it just can't. You can only be in one at a time. And so I was like, I wonder if I could hack my way out of a contracted state by forcing myself to participate in something off of my list that dilated me. And so I looked at gratitude and I was like, I'm going to try that one. And so like my anxiety's building up. I'm doing my rocking thing where I'm about to head into my panic attack. And I'm like, what am I going to be grateful for? And I'm homeless and I'm feeling pretty sorry for myself that day. And I can't think of anything. And so one of the best like hacks to get present is curiosity and observation, because you can't like observe this and not be really present, because you have to be present to observe it. So I used that to look around me, and I saw the sunlight filtering through this palm tree, and it was made this like lacy pattern on me. And it reminded me of being a kid in Alaska, laying in the meadows and watching the tree, you know, through the leaves. And I don't know why, but it suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks that like I was alive and I was here and I hadn't killed myself. And I was so grateful. And the gratitude of that, which was so unexpected, but it just erupted and moved me to tears, that like, what an act of defiance to not have killed myself and to have been there and just trying to figure it out. And I was suddenly grateful for myself, which was weird because, you know, I had a lot of self-loathing and all kinds of things at the time. And the next thing I knew, a half hour had passed and I didn't have a panic attack. You know, and that to me was like, eureka! Like, I'm figuring it out. Like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to turn my life around, you know?
Wow.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of Make Democrats Great Again. This is episode 3, and today's episode we are talking about the Joe Rogan experience. A lot of people really just think of Joe Rogan as like a bad guy. They think he's red-coded, that it's, if you say you like Joe Rogan, that it's seen as like a dude thing, it's a guy thing, it's a bro thing to like Joe Rogan. And that's true, generally, statistically, more bros than chicks are into Rogan. But plenty of women also listen, and plenty of liberals also listen, by the way. Rogan is not some kind of Republican conservative guy. He did endorse Trump this year, more or less endorsed him. I forget whether he technically endorsed him or not. Just like in 2016, he endorsed Bernie, or sort of endorsed Bernie, or at first kind of did, and then whatever. Point being, he's been all over the map. He has generally been pretty blue team for most of his life. And then, like many people, in the last 8 years, things have changed a lot, especially in the last 4 years.
Bernie Sanders had no problem going on Joe Rogan years ago when Joe Rogan endorsed him. A decade ago, Joe Rogan was a Bernie Sanders supporter who would get emotional talking about how important it is to legalize marijuana, who would get emotional talking about how important it is to get Christianity out of politics, in particular on the abortion issue, who had a host of left-wing opinions, including about healthcare. And liberals drove him away by calling him a racist, unearthing jokes he made, calling him a misogynist, really with no evidence.
When you make racist
calling him
jokes
a transphobe,
about people of color,
calling him a
people
lot of
calling you
comedians
racist is likely
make
going to
jokes
happen.
all the time. Calling him transphobic because he didn't like
He
seeing
also didn't
Fallon
love the
Fox
vaccine thing, right?
beating up.
To our point earlier.
That also used to be a left-wing opinion. To be against vaccines like 20 years ago. He actually hasn't shapeshifted very much, to your point. The Democratic Party has shapeshifted and driven him away and alienated his followers.
I think what he ended up seeing was an American political sphere that shifted, and he found ways. He's a lot smarter than people give him credit for. He found ways to walk into where those people were. Yes, he was a proud, ultra leftist, and then he became a proud person on the right, largely because he saw shifting towards the right, and that's where his money and his audience could come from. He shifted because more of his listeners shifted, and that's where he drove it to. That's nothing more than consumerism at work.
Which of his beliefs changed in the past 10 years? It's really hard to point out which of his beliefs
But can
have
I
actually
zoom
changed.
out from...
As far as I know, the left's dismissal and disdain of Rogan started because of Rogan's response to the Fallon Fox controversy. So Fallon Fox was someone who was observed male at birth and lived as a male until 2006. So they were born in 1975. Then at 31 years old, identified as a, not only, I don't know when they identified as a woman, but that's when they started taking hormones and testosterone blockers. And then 6 years later, in 2012, started an MMA career. The issue is that Fallon, who really beat the shit out of her first two opponents, had not told anyone that she was trans before the fights. And so what Rogan was saying wasn't even that biological males who have transitioned shouldn't necessarily play in women's sports in any conditions. What Rogan was saying was just, hey, look, if you're going to be fighting people in the women's category, you need to disclose your transgender status. You can't just be out there with the biological advantages of 31 years of masculinization and then 6 years of suppression of that, which we know doesn't get close to negating all of your physical advantages, even though testosterone blockers and estrogen will distribute your fat somewhat differently, will reduce some of your muscle tone. It doesn't make up for all of the years before. It doesn't make up for that. And also, when you go through male puberty, you just straight up are going to have narrower hips, you're going to have longer bones, denser bone, longer arms, bigger heart, bigger lungs, all these kinds. There's a bunch of different advantages that you have that don't go away with HRT. And it is really important to disclose that status at a minimum. Of course, you should tell people that you were male if you're going to fight them in the field. Even if the female MMA people still want to fight you, it's important for them to have the knowledge of what your anatomy is really going to be like, because it will inform their strategy. Because maybe you're going to need to play more of a defensive game if you realize, hey, one punch from this bitch is going to knock me the fuck out. So I need to be more defensive, more avoidant, just tire her out, that sort of thing. And that's what Rogan said. Rogan said you got to disclose it. You can't just not tell people. And because of that, that was back in the day when, 2012, things have calmed down maybe in the past year, where some trans people have pushed back publicly against the worst of the trans activists. A lot of people are like out and proud as TERFs or gender critical. Now, there's more people who are willing to kind of I'm Spartacus it about pushing back against a lot of the trans stuff. But in 2012, it was like that you could just call Rogan a transphobe and a lot of people would be like, great, got it, he's in the bad guy list, cool. So that's what happened. He was smeared as a transphobe. I think this was probably a really pivotal moment in the culture, actually, because we were all starting to be told that trans women had no physical advantages over XX women, even though we can all see with our own eyes how patently absurd and false that is. And so I think Rogan standing up for this and sticking to his guns about this, amidst all of the backlash and hate that he was getting, actually gained him a lot of trust. And so I didn't really know much about any of this stuff at the time. Maybe I'd kind of heard about the Fallon Fox stuff by 2015 or 16, but I didn't know much about Rogan. I didn't watch Fear Factor growing up. I've watched almost none of it ever. I remember seeing a little clip of Fear Factor at like a hotel or something, and it being so funny just what he looked like at the time, and everybody's relationship to him must be so interesting. So yeah, I never watched Fear Factor. I've listened to very little of him on MMA stuff. I've only in the past few years realized how much I like fighting sports, and his enthusiasm for it is really great. Like, he makes a great announcer because he's so enthusiastic and passionate about the sport, and that's really cool. But that just wasn't something that I had ever partaken in, and I never listened to his podcast until 2020, when a friend of mine at work had turned me on to some of the stuff in the kind of heterodox world, and I started listening to different podcasts. And at some point, I realized that in conversation, a lot of liberal types would use Rogan and Jordan Peterson as punchlines, but it was just kind of like a generic punchline thing, and I was like, but who are these people and why are they punchlines? And so very conveniently, as I said in episode 1, I realized this Joe Rogan person had on this Jordan Peterson person to talk for a few hours, and listening to them, I was like, oh, okay, I like these guys decently as people. I don't think that they're evil people or purposefully lying about things. They're probably wrong about many of their opinions, but I still think that they're decent guys. And I started listening to Rogan more and more and realizing that, and first of all, nobody listens to every episode, and I don't listen to most of the fighting stuff. Sometimes I don't make it through all 3.5 hours of people, but I do also sometimes. And I started listening to him and realizing, like, okay, what this podcast is Rogan is this everyman. He plays an everyman. He's kind of dumb, but he knows that. And he is intellectually curious. He has on lots of different people, and they're able to present who they are. They get to present themselves to the public. He's not going to really push back that much. He might here and there, and he might ask them about aliens to mix things up. They might talk about some stuff they're not going to wind up talking about on other podcasts. But for the most part, you're going to wind up with 2.5 to 3.5 hours of just getting to see someone be themselves and present themselves to us. And that is really valuable. And one of the functions that it has really served is that, particularly when someone gets canceled, or if someone's ideas are deemed beyond the pale, outside of the Overton window, something to censor, then he's going to have that person on and say, okay, your work is being censored. Let's hear you out here. Let's give you a platform to speak. Like, in the liberal world, it feels like people think that he only has on conservatives or something. It's like, no, he has on lots of people. Most of it's not political. Most of it's, there's scientists of all sorts, and musicians and athletes and people. There's just tons of people. Sometimes it does get pretty, like, a lot of times with everyone, they'll get into some little political things at some point, but the show is not a conservative show by any means. I understand that some people think that it's irresponsible to platform some people, and I guess it's true that there may be people who listen who credulously take in everything anyone says, and that's unfortunate that some people might be that credulous. I know that Rogan tries it to some extent to have some balance on his show, but one of the reasons that doesn't happen, that we absolutely have to change in the liberal world, is because a lot of liberals are afraid of doing his show. They're afraid of doing his show. And this was explained to me years ago by a female comic that I know who was wondering kind of how to make new moves in her career. And she'd been offered a chance to do Rogan, and she turned it down. I'm like, why? And she said, it's not even that I would get all these comments from some of his shittier listeners just calling me fat and ugly and whatever. I can deal with that. I don't have to read it. The real problem is that her liberal friends were going to cancel her for doing it. That she would be tarred. This guilt by association thing. Because he had been branded as one of the bads, then that meant that if you went on and did his show, then it could be difficult for you to keep working in Hollywood comedy, or at least in the parts of those that are really liberal, which your version of comedy might be, in your head, might be The Mothership and Andrew Schultz and Tony Hinchcliffe, whatever, if you think of it that way, you go, liberal, what are you talking about? But trust me, most of the industry, the gatekeeping, the powers that be, much less all the Hollywood stuff that is comedy related, because if you want a comedy career, at least for a long time, you were really supposed to do all this Hollywood stuff, or at least all the late night things, SNL, all that extremely, extremely liberal. And so if you did Rogan, you would be in this guilt by association thing, and you might lose lots of friends and career opportunities. But that means if the people who are talking to Rogan are only the people who aren't in that circle, then his ideas are going to get more conservative. His ideas grow redder, and he has a huge audience. And so his audience is going to hear the ideas of people who aren't worried about getting canceled on the left. So that has shaped his show. So we have to do it. It's time to stand up and say to your friends, no, I'm doing Rogan. It's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity not just for your career, but to voice your thoughts to many millions of people. And let's talk about his reach. Not every episode gets as many views as the Trump episode did, but good God. The last I heard, the Trump episode had at least 50 million views. And mind you, that is after a bit of censorship fuckery on YouTube's part, because I remember when it came out, people sent it to me immediately. And then I started watching it, and I started sending it to people immediately. In the first few hours, you could see just the numbers going, just like a rocket. 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. But then I think about 6 hours after it was posted, I noticed that when I went to YouTube and typed in JRE Trump or Rogan Trump, it wouldn't come up. Trump things came up, Rogan things came up, but that interview wouldn't come up. And you had to type in powerful JRE, click on it, and then go to the episode yourself in order to send it to someone or to watch it. And so this is one of these little techniques they have to just suppress, shadow ban, whatever you want to call it. So even with that, it still reached at least 50 million views. His episodes are getting way more views than anything that happens on TV. It's the biggest podcast in the world. So for Democrats to not do it is insane. If you think that Rogan's podcast is just a bad thing for the world, I would encourage you to go to listen to some of the episodes that are not political at all, especially go find the Jewel episode. It's not hard to find. Just type in Jewel into Spotify and it'll be the first thing that comes up. Jewel, if you don't know, is a musician, and she was very popular in my childhood. I didn't know anything about her life, but Rogan has her on, and it is 3 hours and 40 minutes of some of the most beautiful, life-affirming, heartwarming stuff you'll ever hear. I mean, yes, in the beginning, they kind of just are talking about this, that, or the other. It's still interesting, but once they get into Jewel's life story, oh my God. You gotta go listen to it if you haven't. It's so good, and I encourage everyone to do that. And she put out a book, and the book is good. You don't have to, but a lot of people aren't gonna read books. And she's done one other podcast that I've seen, but it's not nearly as long, not nearly as thorough. So without Rogan, we would not have this story. This beautiful, you gotta listen to the Jewel episode. It's so fucking good. The idea that the Rogan podcast is somehow like this right wing thing is just not true. And anybody who has listened to an episode of Rogan will know that. So Democrats, liberals, blue team people, you've got to do Rogan if you have the chance. You got to do Rogan. Kamala Harris should have done Rogan, except that she probably couldn't have handled it because she's never showed us any authenticity. You know, the Call Me Daddy people had Kamala on, but they asked her the most banal questions. It was a fluff thing. It was very frustrating because the Call Me Daddy chick said that they gave her carte blanche to ask Kamala Harris any questions she wanted. And I'm like, really?
I was given 40 minutes with the Vice President of the United States. No topic was off limits.
Really? Really, you had carte blanche? And this is what you asked her?
Conversations in this year's election revolves around a woman's body.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I want to take a moment, and can we try to think of any law that gives the government the power to make a decision?
I know what you're going to ask.
About a man's body. Let's
No.
just pause.
No.
Is there any law?
No. It's no. Look, we are a work in progress.
Yeah, except the millions of men who've been drafted into war, forced to put their body on the line for their country. Did they forget about that?
A lot of people are saying this was the first podcast election, 2024, and that it's only going to be more so in the future. Podcasts are extremely important and are going to be even more important, most likely, in 2028. And what the American people want is authenticity. What a lot of us really, really want is to see your humanity, to see not a robot thing. That's what we didn't like Hillary Clinton because she was robotic. Even more so, Kamala Harris, she didn't feel like a real person. And so the fact that she couldn't go on, she went to Houston to do a rally that Beyonce showed up and didn't even sing at, even though everyone knows Trump's gonna take Texas, and she couldn't make it out to Austin to do Rogan. It's insane.
One of the things I like about doing a show like this, can you imagine Kamala doing this show?
I could imagine her doing this show.
She'd be laying She'd be laying on the floor.
She was supposed to do it, and she might still do it, and I hope she does.
She's not going to do it.
I will talk to her like a human being. I would
if
try to have a conversation with her.
If she did this kind of an interview with you, I hope she does, because it would be a mess. She'd be laying on the floor comatose. You'd be saying, call in the medics.
I think we'd have a fine conversation. I think I'd be able to talk to her. I wouldn't try to interview her. I'd just try to have a conversation with her and hopefully get to know her as a human being. That was my goal, having her on. Trying to get her to express herself just as I don't think these formats are good. I don't think that two people, first of all, I hate the idea of the presidential debates because I hate the idea of a time limitation on complex ideas. Also, you have to break.
I think you have to have the debates, though.
Right, but the way they do the debates, I think, is the wrong way to do it. I think they should have a conversation. I think you and Kamala, you sit across a table with no one in the room but the two of you.
So Rogan had some back and forth with Kamala Harris's team about whether to do the podcast. He wanted them to come to his studio and do it, and they didn't want to do that. I guess they probably wanted to spend another $100K making a custom JRE studio for him to go to so that he would have to come to them instead of them coming to... The whole thing seems so ridiculous.
My studio that is gorgeous in Los Angeles doesn't even cost six figures. So I don't know how cardboard walls could cost six figures, but...
But do you think they did that? I mean, you saw
Absolutely not. With love to them. Oh my God, it was gorgeous, but like, it wasn't that nice. It wasn't like gorgeous marble.
So in the future, Democrats, we have to have candidates who are real people, who are authentic. We don't want this shit anymore where you sound like a politician. We don't want that. We all think of politicians as corrupt, as fake, as stooges for the establishment. This is a very anti-establishment time in America. So we don't want these people who are like saying all the right things this way. We want people who can go on to Rogan and be themselves for 3 hours.
The rhetoric is also that you're Hitler, and that in order to stop Hitler, you have to do whatever it takes.
That was okay, yeah.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, you're hearing this now. Kamala compared you to, said your love of Hitler yesterday.
Kamala's a very low IQ person. She's a very low IQ. I'm for taking tests, too. I think anybody that runs for president should give them tests. And it's not an age thing. It's not based. If you look back on history, 70s and 80s, some of your greatest leaders in the world history, long-time world history, they were in their 70s and their 80s. But I think you should take cognitive tests. I think they say it's unconstitutional. But
That's ridiculous.
I think Kamala should have a test because there's something missing. There's something wrong with her.
Well, I think it's pressure.
I really love being a part of the group of people who watch Rogan because it gives you a lot of insight to be. First of all, there's very little anymore that I can watch that a lot of other people will have watched that we can talk about and say, oh, did you see the Rogan episode with so-and-so? Because most TV shows, we're all watching at weird times and we're binging and they all come out at once anyway, and I'm watching it season 3 and you're on season 2, whatever. There's very little, I don't watch a lot of sports that I can do that with. Like Rogan episodes are actually one of the few things that you can watch where 12 million other people will have also watched within a couple days. And also, it's given lots of us a real insight into the workings of the media and how they lie and paint things. So for instance, when Rogan got COVID and he was taking ivermectin, there was some news show that showed picture or video of him, but they had edited his face to look sallow and yellow. They had put some kind of filter to make him look worse. And that was one. And of course, like those of us who then watch Rogan are watching him expose that stuff as soon as it happens.
And turns out I got COVID. So we immediately threw the kitchen sink at it. All kinds of meds, monoclonal antibodies, ivermectin, Z-Pak, prednisone, everything. And I also got an NAD drip and a vitamin drip, and I did that 3 days in a row. And so here we are on Wednesday, and I feel great. I really only had one bad day.
Also, the way the media talked about Rogan taking ivermectin was so publicly ridiculous. SNL was saying it.
Let's ask our resident medical expert, Joe Rogan.
That's right.
I used to host Fear Factor, and now doctors fear me.
Can you help me, Joe?
Oh, sure thing, Big Bird. You see, I took Carlos Mencia down. I could take COVID. Here's some zinc, and ayahuasca, and some horse medicine. I'm a human, and I took horse medicine.
And everyone was talking about, oh, he's taking this horse dewormer. Can you believe he's taking horse medicine? What an idiot. Again, this liberal punchline. Oh, he's taking horse medicine.
Rogan telling his 13 million Instagram followers that he was treated with several drugs, and he included ivermectin on the list, a drug used for livestock that the FDA and the CDC warn against using to treat COVID.
Which is crazy for a number of reasons, because number one, ivermectin's uses in people as opposed to horses. There's some use of ivermectin for people that has actually won a Nobel Peace Prize. So people use it in humans all the time. Just because something is used in horses doesn't mean it doesn't also get used with humans, usually just a smaller dose. And the other thing is that all of these liberals are sitting there going, wow, that's crazy that someone would take horse medicine. Meanwhile, you're all on ketamine. I have so many literally people, I'm watching them snort ketamine every day. And they're going to sit there and say, but Rogan took horse medicine. Are you fucking kidding me? So Democrats, please, try watching some Rogan. Start with the Jewel episode. Maybe you can subscribe to him for a little bit and just download the episodes that come in your feed where you go, oh, that's an interesting sounding guy. I don't need you to be a Rogan fan. Okay, I just need you to listen to a couple of episodes so that you understand more what Rogan is like, what his podcast is like, and you don't have just some ridiculous idea. It's crazy to me how many of us have these strong opinions about people, podcasts, movies, books, whatever, that we've never engaged with. You need to engage with something for a little while before you have a strong opinion about it. Stop using people as punchlines just because you hear other people doing it and you assume, oh, must be a bad guy if somebody else used him as a punchline in that way. Check out a couple episodes. Please check out the Jewel episode. Seriously, such a beautiful thing. Check out the Jewel episode. Check out a couple, scroll through and see there might be a comic that you like or someone who has an interesting sounding career that you want to check out. You can subscribe and then wait until something good comes up. Check out a little bit of Rogan so that you have an informed opinion and idea of who this person is. And please spread the message that it should be okay to do Rogan. If you're on the left side of things, we need to do Rogan, because the more that we do it, the more influence we'll have on his ideas, the more influence we'll have on his audience. His audience is not like some conservative team. It's a lot of different people. I know lots of Rogan people, and they're all a lot of moderates, for one thing. Some red team, some blue team, tons of moderates and politically fluid people, some politically apathetic people, all kinds of different people listen to Rogan. Please check it out. Please do not shame anyone. Please spread the message. If someone does use, check it out. And then perhaps when someone uses Rogan as a punchline or just kind of throws off frivolously that he's a bad guy, maybe say to him, hey, actually, I don't think Rogan's really a bad guy. He's of course wrong about some things, but I think his podcast sometimes gets things really cool, does some really cool things, maybe a little defensive it. It would be so cool to start seeing a broader range of people on there. And yeah, there are too many men and not enough women, again, but some of that is because, like my friend said, she couldn't do Rogan because she was too afraid of losing all of her friends and opportunities. We have to stop that. If we want more women, if we want more liberal voices on that platform, influencing not only Rogan, but all of his audience, we've got to do it. We've got to stop acting like he's some bad guy. You know who I want to do? I want Brene Brown to do Rogan. I want Essa Perel to do Rogan. I want Natalie Wynn to do Rogan. There's so many people. Well, I think that's everything I need to say about this. Thanks for listening. If you like what I'm trying to do right here, please support me by subscribing, liking, commenting. You can tell me what I got right, what I got wrong, what I haven't thought of. You can just put a couple little American flags down there if you don't know what else to comment and you want to support me. And more than anything, if you can share this with a friend, share it on social media, share it in person, text it to someone, anything like that would be huge. Share it with someone that you think could benefit by this, or someone who, if maybe you've never watched Rogan and you have a friend who loves Rogan and you just want to share it to them to say, hey, I've decided to check out the Jewel episode of Rogan because of this, and I'll let you know what I think, or something like that. Is there anything else I need to say? Here I am in my studio finally. If you're watching this long and you're interested, I am in my studio But I just moved in and there's a bunch of stuff I haven't found, although I just realized that the mic that I was going to use to record into is literally on the ground right there, and I didn't know where it was when I started recording. But here we go. I'm no longer in my car.